get that on the recording so they don't know.
We hope. Oh man. Well, welcome to episode 58. This is The Bar's Ankle High, and I am Katie.
I'm Garrett. Do we have any housekeeping items?
We do actually, since I'll probably just forget to throw it into an episode before this happens.
I love how much we've learned in the last year.
Welcome to Tarek, our newest Patreon member. Thank you so much for supporting us, and we're very excited to have you. I hope you like all your bonus features.
You're going to get more than you bargained for.
Especially now. And if you want to join Tarek, then you can go to patreon.com/thebarsankleHigh. As a quick reminder, while Garet is on maternity leave, all Anklets and Limbo champions will be getting access to ad-free episodes on our Patreon. So if you hate listening to ads, that's the way to go. Yeah. So that is all we have for housekeeping at this point, because this episode will be coming out
at some
September 21st. I have the spread. We got to keep the spreadsheet up because it's golden.
Yeah, no, it's necessary.
Yes.
I had all intentions of being helpful with that. And like much of my life lately, nothing is going as I planned. And I forget about everything.
Yeah, right now I'm just super pumped when you just put your notes onto the Google Drive so that I don't have to bother you for them. Because I know that it will be fruitless if I try to bother you for them in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm having that like you say, September 21st. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to only have one person in my torso by then. Not two.
Hopefully. Yeah. Unless you're like possessed.
That's true. That's a good point. So today, we're going to talk about brain spotting therapy and EMDR therapy.
Is brain spotting like train spotting?
Yes.
Huh.
The same amount of drugs involved.
Okay.
And there's a baby crawling on the ceiling. It's very strange.
Cool.
No, it's actually nothing like Trainspotting. But you know, it's funny because I was thinking the same thing to myself when I first heard it. And this is actually something I had not ever heard of. And because we have a podcast about ADHD, anytime somebody sees something about ADHD, they send it to me. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of this? So I got a message from a friend of mine, and she asked if I had heard of brain spotting. And I was like, no, that's not anything I was familiar with.
I'm picturing like if Lisa Frank had to draw a brain and it just has like rainbow leopard dots on it.
Not quite.
Oh, so also not that. Got it.
No. So by process of elimination.
Okay.
So obviously, like, you know, then it's a rabbit hole of let me Google what this is. So before we talk about brain spotting, we're going to talk about EMDR therapy because that's the more well-established therapy technique. Okay. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It was developed.
They did a good job in choosing an acronym for that one instead. Eye 100%. Movement desensitization.
It was developed.
Oh my God, 80s. Is it hypnotherapy?
Kind of. It actually, it has elements of that. They both do. I would say brain spotting has more elements of that than, or like a mindfulness component to it than EMDR does.
Oh, okay.
But it was actually developed by accident. The doctor who developed it was
very ADHD.
Yes. She was trying to do research on like brain storing trauma and then made these connections and kind of then fine-tuned this therapy technique.
When you say brain storing trauma, you mean like people who have like recovered memories?
Like post-traumatic stress disorder specifically is what it gets used for a lot.
But not for like people who have like blacked out certain things and they want to like recover what they're missing in their...
This is more taking a traumatic event and helping your brain process it and kind of release it so that you're not stuck in a loop of like flashbacks and triggers and to kind of help you like move on so you're a little bit less stuck on that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's actually found to be really effective in a very few number of sessions in comparison. They both are in comparison to cognitive behavioral therapy. So EMDR does not require talking in great detail about the distressing issue. It rather focuses on the changing emotions, the thoughts, the behaviors around that issue, and it kind of allows your brain to process it, resume its like natural healing, and then move past it.
Okay.
So Washington Post had what I thought was the best explanation. So I'm going to read a big chunk of this article because I thought it was like a very good explanation.
So all right, I'm ready.
I'm ready. When we experience traumatic event or events, the parts of our brain that get physically and emotionally activated, the amygdala and hippocampus, go into hyperdrive. So the amygdala can be thought of as our survival brain, where we experience emotional and fearful memories. The hippocampus regulates short-term memory processing. So when we're in a state of hyperarousal, one of the parts of our brains involved in rational thought, the prefrontal cortex, cannot function as it would when we're in a calm state. So you wind up having fragmented memories.
Okay.
We don't have the neurological capacity to store traumatic or disturbing events in a synchronous manner. Instead, the memories become stuck in the survival region of the brain and they're left unprocessed, which is why you have that loop of being like in that fight or flight all the time.
Yeah. Revisit episode 31 for our discussion on PTSD.
Yes. And it's too bad we didn't do these back to back because this ties in so well with PTSD.
Yeah.
So EMDR is thought to synchronize the survival and the rational parts of the brain, which help us process the memory in an integrated manner, leading to the release of the traumatic memory and the emotional experiences that have been like stuck in the nervous system. So the method used to synchronize these brain regions is bilateral stimulation. It's a right-left rapid eye movement guided by a therapist using a finger or like a wand. Or they use like tactile, like touching or like auditory tones, like with headphones.
So what happened to Zoolander?
Yes. See Zoolander for an explanation.
Happy. Killed the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Sorry.
Also see our post-traumatic stress disorder for my derailing of the conversation talking about bear attacks.
Yes. But important information.
And just to be clear, I remember none of it. So
I remember you're supposed to introduce yourself to the bear somehow.
Hello, bear.
I don't know. According to the National Parks Department or whatever the fuck that agency's called.
Oh my God. So that bilateral stimulation, which is a cornerstone of this therapy, their thought is that kind of simulates what happens during REM sleep when our brain is using that bilateral eye movement to kind of integrate information from throughout the day. So scientists believe that when we're processing survival information, or they believe that that's when our brain processes survival information. So that's usually the reason why we feel so much better and we have mental clarity after having a good night's sleep, is that eye movement and our brain connecting those different areas.
Huh.
So they try and mimic that with the EMDR therapy. So
that's pretty cool. And you're fully conscious when you do this?
Yep.
Huh.
The most widespread use is for post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's also used for a variety of anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, dissociative disorders, eating disorders, gender dysphoria, obsessive compulsive disorders, personality disorders, and trauma disorders. So the EMDR is done in 8 different stages. So
Whoa.
They wind up...
That's like Scientology.
Now I'm going to be totally seeing the connection between Scientology and EMDR.
When you get to the top, are you going clear? Is that...
Yes. and you have to buy.
It turns out
next
that
level.
Garet joined Dianetics in researching this episode.
Can you imagine? Oh my God. And then at the end,
That
I'm
would be
like,
such a twist.
so all I need is for you to join me.
That's the end of the podcast, is that you actually joined a cult.
And then there's a spinoff of Katie trying to get me out of the cult.
Yes.
So they wind up doing like a history and treatment planning. So these different stages can happen in single appointments. They can happen over multiple appointments. It kind of depends on the patient, what you're dealing with, what your goals are.
How many Thetans are inhabiting your body?
Yes. Yeah. If you have multiple people inside your torso, it might take longer. So they gather information, they discuss your goals, including like the target of what you're wanting to address. The therapist will go through and explain the framework, they set expectations, and they guide them through different coping skills. Hiccups at the same time. Referred to as resourcing. Then there's an assessment where the patient identifies belief systems, feelings, body sensations, images associated with the target. And the therapist uses that as like a baseline for gauging progress. So they're kind of they're looking at your physical responses before starting the therapy. And then they'll use that to reevaluate you throughout the process.
Makes sense.
So they're just establishing your baseline. The two scales that they use are called subjective units of distress, where you rate the level of intensity of feelings and the body sensations on a scale of 0 to 10, and validity of cognition, where the patients rate how true the adaptive beliefs feel on a scale of 1 to 7. Then you go into the desensitization phase, where they're using bilateral stimulation for several rounds while the patient is thinking about the traumatic or disturbing event. And it'll continue until the subjective unit of distress, so the feelings that you're getting, the body sensations, until those go from like, say 9 to a 1. So they'll continue going through that until you can like kind of bring yourself down. So when they have a low rating, it increases when they go from that SUD rating of, say 9 to a 2, it increases their access to these different neural networks, which brings them into their next stage, which is installation, where the therapist is using that bilateral stimulation, but they're doing it slower and in shorter rounds while the patient thinks about the disturbing or traumatic event. And they pair it with like different adaptive beliefs is what they call them. So it's really just like, what's the word I'm looking for? Things that you tell yourself to make yourself feel better.
Affirmations?
Thank you. Jesus Christ. So they wind up using that stimulation, slower and shorter rounds in combination with these events with different affirmations like I did the best I could or I'm lovable. And they do that until that VOC number, which is, what did that stand for? Validity of cognition, which is where they're rating how true those affirmations feel.
Okay.
And they do that until they're strengthening that to the highest end of the scale of 7. So then they wind up doing like a body scan where they're going through and they're seeing, okay, what am I still feeling? Where am I still feeling that tension, that anxiety, that stress, that fear with the bilateral stimulation? And then at the end of the session, they kind of restabilize, go through some relaxation, and kind of get somebody back to their baseline before they leave. And then what they do is they kind of reevaluate at the beginning of the next session. And then they decide, okay, like, are we ready to move on to like another phase of this? Or do we want to stay in this same event until we can bring those numbers lower?
Okay.
So they kind of wind up just cycling through this. And I mean, sometimes somebody can be there for 3 appointments and then they feel like they've worked through it enough and they've been able to like de-escalate enough that they're like ready to either move on to another event or that they're ready to stop the therapy altogether.
Yeah, so then is the idea that you would be able to graduate to like regular talk therapy or CBT after this? Like,
So I think what attracts a lot of people to it is if you wanted to be done with it, you could just totally be done with it. And people even report feeling continually feeling better for like 6 months after the therapy is completely done. So some people need 3 sessions, some people need 12 sessions. And you can wind up with, for short periods of time following the sessions, like really bad dreams, headaches, fatigue, which makes sense because you're going through and you're dipping into these like traumatic thoughts and memories. But ultimately you're helping your brain like regenerate pathways that it's thinking about to get it out of that fight or flight response. It's actually, so it has been shown to be effective in clinical trials, and it's actually backed as a best practice by the VA for treatment of PTSD.
wow.
Which I feel like also is probably like a financial decision too, because they're like, oh, we can get these people de-escalated with 5 sessions instead of 5 years of sessions.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, it's also, I think, VA or just regular people in general, it's hard to keep people in therapy and it's
100%.
hard to keep people going back when you feel like, well, I'm still feeling shitty. Like, I
Or
still.
changes of insurance.
Right. So, you know,
Or a
there, I
therapist that
think,
leaves practice,
for example.
for example.
But yeah, you know, all these different things that, you know, make our country a shithole.
Yeah.
Are things that, you know, there's a benefit to having a short-term potential solution.
Right.
And most of my information for the PTSD episode came from the VA's website because they run the National Center for PTSD or whatever the hell it's called. Because I mean, you know, like all of their staff end up with it.
Right.
So, you know, they they have a lot of candidates for studies. And yeah, so I mean, I can't say that like I would discredit their findings because I think at the end of the day, I'm confident actually that the actual people who make up the VA, the workers, the doctors, the nurses, the support staff, actually want what the VA is there for.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so I think that it's reasonable to rely on their conclusions. And yeah, I also think, you know, especially even if I recall correctly, the Center for PTSD was talking about how like rates in women, PTSD in women is significantly higher than those in men. But there's also the question of like, are men just not reporting it? And if men can report it and be in and out in 3 sessions,
yes.
And it's like, you know, kind of going to the chiropractor after like, I don't know, getting into a little fender bender. So you have like
right.
a little neck thing. And like, oh yeah, you just go for a few weeks and then you're done. Well, then maybe you can have more people being willing to accept that like, oh, it's kind of like a broken bone. I just get my eyes flickered around and the end.
They just need a laser pointer and I'm fine. No, it's, I mean, it totally like.
And they fixed my lazy eye.
For people who, and I think it definitely depends like what you're going for and what your goals are. But
Yeah.
like for me, I find cognitive behavioral therapy helpful because sometimes I just need to like decompress. I just need to like word vomit and get all the anxious thoughts out. And then I'm like, it's like taking the, like a kettle that boils over, taking it off the heat and being like, oh, okay, man, I feel so much better.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to work through a traumatic event like this, one of the things they said is the reason that, and well, I'll talk about brain spotting in a minute, but the reason that these therapies are potentially more successful is because cognitive behavioral therapy is you're just using that one part of your brain. You're using the part that has that memory, and you're talking through it and recollecting it the best you can. Whereas this is specifically working from like not a brain chemical, but like brain pathway perspective, where they're trying to help it move through your brain to the next stage so that it's not stuck in that fight or flight.
Right. I mean, it makes sense that those memories would be stored in a different part of your brain, because if you're having that kind of like primal adrenaline reaction, or if you had that adrenaline reaction to that experience, your brain will keep those memories in the part of your brain that is used for survival.
Right.
So that then, potentially the next time, which more often than not, there isn't a next time for these types of things. So,
right.
But the idea being that the next time your brain knows exactly where to go to get that information for how we survived last time and what to do.
Right.
But
that was one of the things I read. They said, like, if you're escaping a bear attack, for example, that information would be great. But if you're not, your brain needs to be able to like digest it, so that you're not constantly like bear attack.
Right. No, totally.
Yeah.
And because it's distracting, for lack of a better term, like when you're constantly like,
and disruptive.
checking every car to make sure that the driver
Right.
isn't somebody that you're trying to avoid or whatever.
Right.
It's disruptive at best.
Yeah, so I thought that was really cool. So now we're going to talk about brain spotting.
Yes.
So brain spotting is kind of like a combination of mindfulness and EMDR, where it's using that mind-body connection to help process whatever it is, typically trauma.
Okay.
But as time goes on and things improve, because this was developed in 2003, I think.
Okay.
So as time goes on, it's one of those like, oh, you know what else we can use this for? We can also use it for this. So it improves, the techniques improve, and they can apply it to more things.
Okay.
So similar to the EMDR, it's trying to help your brain process things that are stuck. So it's trying to get it from that survival part of your brain and move it on to like a rational part and help you kind of digest it. Also using spots in your visual field. So one of the benefits of brain spotting over EMDR is that they don't make you kind of relive that trauma or whatever it is that's getting you there in order to release it from the body. So it works on the theory that the feelings can become stuck and it leads to physical and mental ailments, which I know I've mentioned before, that Cure for Chronic Pain podcast. It talks a lot about how you wind up having physical side effects from different mental health things that are going on.
Yeah.
Where you wind up, stuck in that fight or flight response, or, you're experiencing chronic pain, or, I mean, there's a whole slew of different conditions that she's talked about, but similar to this, you've got that mind-body connection that's causing physical ailments.
Okay.
So it's believed that your brain's memory of a particular incident is reset in the body and the brain through this brain spotting. So the guy who developed it, who was actually working with that EMDR therapy, described it as like a stuckness and described it as a frozen maladaptive homeostasis. Because the thought is our bodies are generally meant to be.
He couldn't put stuckness in the American Journal of Medicine.
Yeah. He's like, like distinguishments.
Listen, I was talking to this fox doctor, and
then there was also a frog doctor. There was a word doctor, and we were talking about different words. Oh my God. So yeah, I would say like frozen maladaptive homeostasis is definitely like more of a clinical term than stuckness.
Stuckness.
That's very true.
Maladaptive homeostasis, though, is an interesting phrase.
Yes.
As long as you know what homeostasis means.
Right. And the
which I do, because I'm smart, but...
Yeah, because I'm super smart. and I can remember things like definitions.
Not me Googling it.
And the thought is like our bodies are generally meant to be in a state of homeostasis, like maintaining a stable environment.
Right.
As an example of definition.
I was gonna say, if I'm remembering correctly from like high school biology, it's like the thing where you like your body temperature stays at roughly 98 degrees.
And if it goes above that, your body's then working to try and cool itself to get it back to where it should be.
Right. So like what your body naturally does to keep your average temp at 98 degrees is homeostasis. Yes. And like you're out of homeostasis when you can't get back to normal.
Right.
But you're able to fluctuate normally. It's just being able to get back to that baseline.
Right. And that's, I thought the way they put it was really good. Attempting to maintain a stable environment.
Yes. Yeah.
So what happens is you then get stuck in this, for lack of a better term, like dysfunctional homeostasis. And it's not helpful to your body. So your body is now like in this heightened state, and then we're trying to maintain that heightened state as opposed to being like at what is actually a stable environment for you.
That's totally what it felt like.
Yes. But yeah, I read that description. I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
That's what it feels. I mean, that's what it felt like to me when I was immediately in my aftermath of my traumatic event. Was like, I was hanging on and I was showing up to work every day and I was on time and doing everything that I needed to do. But I was just at this higher frequency where like everything was a higher stake, regardless of what I was doing. Pumping gas, like anything was just harder.
Yeah. Well, because it's like, I mean, it's such a experiencing something really intense and then that drop off, like when is your brain getting an opportunity to like really process it? Because you don't want to think about it. You don't want to like go back and relive that, but it's like it, and the stuckness really is like a good term. And it makes sense that you wind up with that maladaptive homeostasis where you're like stuck in this like heightened, like not really a healthy spot for you to be in mentally, because really that's a major stress on your body.
I was just gonna say, because then you end up with those physical sequelae. Like I gained like 50 pounds that first year. Like that's a lot.
Well, and you think about like the cortisol that's probably being released all the time, and like all of the things that cortisol is then making your body do in response. Like it's just like so many things on this podcast when we break it down to like brain science, like the explain to me like I'm 5 brain science.
It's all interconnected, man.
And it makes total sense. And it also, again, like we say this all the time, but it like removes the like blame from it. You're not like, oh, I just handled it really bad. No, like my brain was responding to it in a way that brains respond to something like this.
Well, right. And, explain to me like I'm 5 what a good way of handling it would be then.
Right.
Because like I was able to keep up, like I said, I was able to keep up appearances. It was only when I was alone that I completely lost control.
Yeah.
Either in my car or like alone in my room. That's the only time.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm sure I looked a mess, but but we're not inviting my former coworkers on this podcast.
No, we're not. No, we are not. So the way they put it was that like traditional talk therapy is known as like top-down therapy. So you're trying to solve problems with like a conscious mind. These different, like they call them brain body therapies, are known as bottom up, where you're aiming to release the physical stress in the body, which then is going to allow you to release the emotional stress from the body as well.
Okay.
So brain spotting therapy works on the midbrain, which controls the part of the central nervous system responsible for processing things like vision, hearing, sleep, motor control. Okay. So when trauma occurs, this part of the brain is going into freeze mode to conserve resources because you're in this like defensive mode. And it says, it's necessary if you're like fighting a tiger, but is less helpful for psychological traumas. But our bodies are not distinguishing between the two.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
fight or flight is fight or flight.
Yeah, the
So,
threat is the same.
right. So brain spotting is like a little bit more fluid, and it doesn't have like those 8 defined steps like EMDR does. So generally they said that there's like a blueprint for what you can expect from like most sessions. Oh my God, the shortness of breath with this is like, it's ridiculous. Literally getting out of breath like between sentences. So typically there's a therapist guiding you, but most of it is self-directed. So you start with like relaxing breathing, listening to like music that might be designed to move from like one ear to the other in headphones. So you get that bilateral thing that they use in the EMDR, and they kind of get you like into a mindfulness state.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've like settled yourself, you identify a place in your body where you feel the most distress. Like, I know I tend to feel like neck and shoulders and like stomach when I'm
Mm-hmm.
like at a really heightened state. And then you're going to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10. So then with the therapist's help, you find your brain spot, which is where your eyes naturally focus when that discomfort is the strongest. So if there's like a point in your visual plane that you tend to like focus on when you're feeling like that, that's where they're going to like keep their finger or a pointer or whatever to help. And they kind of like, you know, move things around to help you identify where that spot is. And they can take like different approaches. So sometimes a therapist will take what they call an outside window, where they're observing your gaze and recommending a point, or an inside window where you have the patient identifying the point. But anyway.
Okay. And what do they do with the point?
So what they do is they hone in on the feelings coming up as you stick. So you're focusing on that point, on this one area of your body where you're feeling this tension. And then you can either talk through it out loud. It can be something that's more internal. And you go through and you take the time to process the whole experience of like what came up. At the end of the session, you're then going to like reevaluate your level of distress. So the idea is that,
is it like they mentioned something like you were T-boned in a car, for example? So they mention, you know, imagine yourself getting T-boned in a car. Where are you feeling your tension? And then you look at your spot while you have the tension, thinking of the trauma causing event, and then work through
it sounds
why
like
it's
it's
making you feel
very individual. So like
okay.
if you want to talk through whatever is causing that, you can. If you just want to be focusing on that point using the mindfulness, work on de-escalating, you can do that too. And it sounds like your brain kind of is doing that subconsciously, where they're taking that tension feeling and helping you digest it without having to do deep dives into what happened and the whole, you know, rehashing whatever is causing the tension.
Okay. So what's the therapist's job then there, other than like finding
They're
a spot
really
on the
just
wall?
guiding. So
Okay.
it's I mean, like I personally probably wouldn't find it super helpful to just be like flapping in the wind on my own.
Yes,
But
I think that's
maybe it's
why I'm like
something, you know,
struggling to understand. Because I also I'm thinking that
yeah.
I would probably do better with the first one, the MDMA
Mm-hmm.
one.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. What was that train spotting with the baby with the MDMA? That one. But yeah,
You
like
know, when you have a
I
dream and then it's
have
and
you
then you
read a
go
dream
and
that you and it's definitely one of those things like I mean kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy where I mean the therapist can be more or less verbal in how much they're guiding you versus you just kind of like talking yourself through it or thinking yourself through it. I mean, I
mm,
personally would benefit more from like somebody guiding me through this. Like I am not good with mindfulness on my own, but I like a guided meditation, I do much better with. Still not good, but better than on my own.
It's true though. It's less pressure. I don't have to like think of what I'm supposed to be doing in addition to them doing it.
Right. So it says
it's sort of like I can't do yoga on my own. Like I need to be following a tape or something, or an instructor in real life.
Yeah, I never think of it as, I usually just think I'm doing like mobility. Even if I'm doing yoga poses, there's like no mindfulness component when I'm just doing it by myself. I'm just stretching.
Right. I was like, I'll just stretch, but it's not like I'm not doing Avasana or something. Like I'm not doing going through the warrior poses with like any sort of rhythm or intention of like, finishing the sequence.
No. And then when I'm doing it by myself, it's like, I'm not counting how many times I'm doing something. I'm like, okay, well, I feel better now, so I'm just going to move on to the next thing. It's not like,
correct.
I'm going to do this 4 times on each side.
Yeah, but they're saying that the YouTubes.
Adrian. You may feel more exhausted than usual. It can cause like additional feelings that continue to surface, but they're saying that that's kind of part of the processing, and they encourage people to reach out to their therapist if that's what's happening. So they did one small study where they said patients experience a reduction in PTSD, anxiety, and depression symptoms within a few sessions. And they're saying that this can even be fewer sessions than EMDR or cognitive behavioral therapy. They're saying it can lead to a reduction in pain, memories becoming less painful, reduced negative thought patterns, better sleep, increased energy. And they're saying that, like the EMDR, they continued to get better following their treatments being over. And they did like 6-month follow-ups with people who said that their symptoms were not coming back at 6 months. Whereas with lots of other forms of therapy, if they stopped going to therapy, their symptoms started to crop up again. They do tell people to keep in mind that this is like a newer type of therapy, and is still considered somewhat like an alternative therapy, and there's not a ton of research on it because it is so new.
Okay, so not covered by insurance.
Probably not. I think there is,
for our international listeners, that's what that means in America.
That's American speak.
That's code.
It sucks here. And another benefit is it has the shorter number of sessions, but you have to do less active digging and reliving into what brought you there. They're saying that it can be shown to impact all types of trauma, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, depressive syndromes, addiction, chronic pain, emotional dysregulation, ADHD, pre-verbal attachment issues, which I don't really have like a...
It's starting to sound like a cure-all
definition on that. And they say that because it is like kind of a free form format, it can help people who struggle to like verbally describe either their negative emotions or their trauma, or, again, whatever it is that's bringing them there. And doesn't require people to like disclose things if they don't want to rehash it or, lay everything out. Like, how many therapists have I been to, and I've had to lay this out for every therapist.
Right.
Because that can be exhausting for people.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Because it's like every time you start with somebody new, it's like, oh, fuck, I gotta go through all this shit again. It's like, can't I just get flashcards where it's like,
totally.
This is,
and it's
what
the
brings me
thing
here.
where I'm like, I'll sign whatever authorization you need to get my last person's notes, please. Just
and read them. Please also read them. Yeah. It sucks. So this is kind of like the EMDR where we were saying that, when you see that finite number of sessions, because they're saying typically it lasts about 6 sessions.
Okay.
The EMDR is like, they said typically 8 to 10, sometimes 12. When you have something with more finite numbers, even if it takes more than that, it's still not, I've been going, once a month or once a week for 4 years, and I don't feel like I've gotten any better.
Mm-hmm.
You've at least got this like shorter timeline where you could be feeling like significant results.
Yeah.
As far as ADHD goes, so this is really more EMDR,
Mm-hmm.
brain spotting. And the thing that was initially sent to me was on brain spotting and ADHD. But it was kind of at a very surface level. They didn't really get into much specifics.
Were
But
they just saying like it could help with ADHD
they were like,
symptoms?
I did use this for my ADHD and I'm wrapping up my brain spotting therapy now.
Gotcha.
But the EMDR, so one study found that it was helpful in reducing ADHD symptoms in children and adolescents who had experienced trauma. I think it's worth noting, and adults also who experience childhood trauma. But it's worth noting that, like, we've also talked about how sometimes PTSD and ADHD in kids they're kind of used almost synonymously because so many of the symptoms are the same.
Yes.
So that's worth, I feel like, grain of salt, keeping in mind. So it can help people process, memories or whatever it is that's causing them distress, and can also help them learn new coping skills and ways of dealing with those difficult situations. So it says that techniques that can be used in EMDR, they talk about resource development, where you're reprocessing things to help people develop internal resources where they feel safe, confident, calm, to help them better manage things like emotional dysregulation and impulsivity. They did what they call a cognitive interweave. So when you're reprocessing, they can kind of, when you're using those affirmations, you can do that to kind of like untangle things that may be contributing to the ADHD symptoms. So like if you can help somebody use those to have better coping skills or managing your emotions, that can also help with the emotional dysregulation. So it's not like an avalanche effect where you're just like barreling down a hill and tangling yourself up. And I don't like that assessment.
Well, yeah,
personally.
I mean, I think it could probably help with, if you're really struggling with like rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Totally.
Especially having, with brain spotting, the idea that like you're picking a physical point in your body that you're feeling that emotion. Because I for sure will like feel it right in my gut or like right underneath my sternum. Like,
yeah.
it just knocks the wind out of me.
Yeah. Or like my skin feels hot.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just feel like I'm on fire.
So I could imagine, yeah, in that context, now I can see how I could potentially use it.
And they also said, like, if you have these like specific memories, I feel like especially from adolescence, teenage years,
Totally.
where they can kind of help you process those, which, I mean, obviously rejection sensitivity, emotional dysregulation, but when you settle those things, that may cut down on impulsivity or justice sensitivity. So they're thinking that if you can reduce the impact of things like that, you may be better able to focus, regulate your emotions. Maybe you're less hyperactive because you're not in that heightened state. They do also sometimes do tapping or eye movements during like other stages of this to help you better kind of, it says to integrate the sensory and emotional components of the memory. I don't know, that sounds like therapy speak at a certain point.
Yeah.
And then I get like kind of lost to the weeds with it. But ultimately they're saying, you can use this EMDR to kind of maybe boost your self-esteem a little bit, and really just like generally improve your overall mental health. So if you're not feeling as anxious and you're not in that heightened state, maybe that's going to cut down on your hyperactivity. Maybe it is going to help you focus a little bit better. Obviously, nothing's going to cure ADHD. We've talked about that.
Right.
It's always going to be about kind of symptom management and finding techniques that work for you. So if you've got like super high anxiety with your ADHD, maybe this would be something that would like help you just keep yourself at like a less maladaptive homeostasis and help you keep yourself at like a more calm, serene level where you're less agitated by things. Jumpy.
Yeah.
Is kind of what I'm thinking of, like hyperactive.
Yeah, totally. That was super interesting.
Yeah, like I started reading about it and I was like, oh no shit. I've never heard of this.
I'll be goddamned.
And the only thing we had really talked about was aside from the drugs that I talked about in the depression episode.
Yes.
Was really cognitive behavioral therapy. So I was like, oh, this is like kind of a different a different way of going about it. Because I know like when I did something kind of similar to this when I was in high school. I went to see a therapist about anxiety. And we did what was called thought field therapy, which involved tapping. It probably falls under this EMDR, but you would kind of like use like a mindfulness thing and this tapping. And there was like different, it was supposed to be like probably like acupressure points. And there was different points that you could tap on your body. And it was like on your face. There was one that was like under your arm that you could tap if you were feeling like you were at a super heightened state. And I did that for a while. Like sometimes I will even still find myself doing it a little bit, like almost passively, like not even realizing that I'm doing it. But I think there's some validity to things like that. And again, this is like a non-pharmaceutical technique, just as like another option in case there are people who are reluctant to medicate, although medication has been extraordinarily helpful for me.
Yeah, me too. Big fan of meds.
big old fan. Maybe not MDMA, but meds.
Yeah. No, I'm not a fan of Molly. That's MDMA, right?
I think so.
I'm cool. I'm hip.
Yeah, no, I always felt like I was too high strung for drugs like that. I was like, you know what I don't need? I don't need something that I'm afraid is going to give me a bad trip and then give myself a bad trip.
I
or
really
something that's going to make me
genuinely have never felt the need. Like it wasn't even necessarily like fear of the trip. It was just the kind of thing where I was like, why though? I mean, I went to Amsterdam with a college group, when I was in college, and, people were getting stoned and taking all sorts of things that are legal in Amsterdam that aren't, or certainly at the time weren't legal anywhere in the US. And it just was like, I don't know. I mean, I'm good.
Yeah, like I was never much of a drinker.
I definitely drank.
But I don't know. I was always like a little scared of drinking. Smoking pot I could, always really get down with. But it makes sense that, when you have ADHD and you're like keyed up all the time and you've got anxiety and you're always like up here, something that like helps you come down here.
Yes.
It makes sense that's why I went for that and not Coke. I can't think of a worse person on Coke than me.
Yeah.
Clearly. Oh my God. So that was Brainspotting. And
yeah, that
EMDR.
was super interesting. Yeah, Trainspotting and MDMA. Got it.
Yep.
Nailed it.
Killed it. Just as like some other things to try if maybe you're overwhelmed at the thought of having to sit down and go through your life story with a therapist for an unlimited number of sessions, or maybe you only have, a certain amount of money to be spending on them, or whatever it is, don't have coverage for it, or, again, United States problems. It might be a viable option for you.
Yeah, no, that was super interesting. And I think it was really good information. And again, like not expecting it to tie into ADHD, but yet again, here we are.
You never know.
The more
Truly.
you know.
Oh, did I mention you can cure your HD by getting a planner? Did I not include that earlier in the...
That was not a part of the MDMA lesson, but we'll circle back.
Yeah. Part 2 coming on just buy a planner. So yeah, I guess the sign off today would be when you have ADHD, you're really good at thinking outside the box. So think outside the box and maybe try some different therapies.
You can follow us on Instagram at The Bars Ankle High. We are also on Threads at The Bars Ankle High. And you can join our Patreon, as we said in the beginning of the show, at patreon.com/thebarsankle-high. You can check out our merch. We're on Zazzle at bit.ly/ankle-high-merch. And make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you can find us, because we're super cute. And also leaving those reviews and like actually writing out a review is like the best way to help us like get discovered by new people and reach more audience, so that we can be famous and quit our day jobs permanently.
Oh, for the love of God, please.
So yeah, do all that stuff and then we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.